Western nations spent 4 decades believing they were outsourcing cheap labor to China, only to realize they had surrendered the irreversible physical monopoly over modern industrial civilization itself. For decades, corporate strategy rested on a simple premise: relocate assembly lines to the east, slash labor costs, and reap infinite profit margins. But if cheap labor was the sole engine of Beijing's rise, that equation should have broken down years ago. In 2000, the average Chinese factory worker earned just 60 cents an hour, while China commanded 7% of global manufacturing output. Yet by 2023, even as average wages soared to $7.10 an hour, China's share of global manufacturing output did not collapse. It expanded to 29.8%. Cheaper alternatives like India, Mexico, and Vietnam offered vastly lower wage rates on paper, yet multinational corporations remained stubbornly locked in place. The core dynamic had quietly shifted. China was no longer competing on cheap labor. It was wielding an integrated network of megaports, component suppliers, and hyper-dense industrial clusters. Moving a facility out of Shenzhen did not just mean changing postcodes. It required recreating an entire physical infrastructure from scratch. Every attempt to bypass China's rising wages unraveled against this operational friction, leaving the modern world permanently bound to a supply chain it can no longer escape. In 1980, Deng Xiaoping initiated a sweeping structural gamble, carving out special economic zones across China's coastline designed to act as hyper-efficient, isolated magnets for foreign capital. But low-cost manual labor was merely the entry point. The true operational trap emerged from a multi-trillion-dollar state-directed logistics engine built on a scale no market-driven democracy could ever justify on a balance sheet. Beijing didn't simply construct factories. It engineered an integrated, friction-free physical ecosystem. By co-locating ultra-deepwater megaports directly alongside high-speed freight rail networks and massive industrial power grids, state planners systematically eliminated the inland transport bottlenecks that traditionally paralyze emerging markets. The resulting maritime advantage is overwhelming, demonstrated by the fact that China now commands 7 of the top 10 global container ports, orchestrating global trade with cold, relentless synchronization. This geographic compression transformed physical proximity into an insurmountable operational weapon. Inside a hyperdense cluster like Shenzhen, a design studio dispatches specs locally, transfers components within 5 miles to specialized markets like Huaqiang Bay, and executes an overnight build via local S&T assembly to complete a prototype turnaround in under 48 hours. Whereas a Western competitor attempting a fragmented supply chain orders across 3 countries, waits for international freight, incurs port inspection delays, and burns through months of runway before it finally delivers a final prototype. State capital effectively subsidized the total elimination of non-labor friction across every layer of the manufacturing apparatus. Every deepwater dock, high-voltage power line, and freight rail corridor was systematically engineered to lock intermediate manufacturing permanently in place, leaving foreign industrial policy trapped inside an inescapable ecosystem it can neither replicate nor replace. That ecosystem operates on a structural phenomenon known as supply chain gravity, a physical force so dense that geography itself becomes a competitive weapon. In Western capital markets, manufacturing is viewed as a discrete, movable variable. A factory built in Ohio can, in theory, be dismantled and reconstructed in Vietnam or Mexico. But in China, production does not exist in isolation. It exists in hyper-specialized industrial clusters where every tier of the supply chain is compressed into a single municipal district. Consider the sheer scale of this township specialization model, a strategy that turned entire cities into global monopolies. The town of Datang produces 33% of the world's socks. Shenzhou manufactures 40% of all global neckties, while Shenzhen's Huaqiang Bay district controls a staggering 50% of the entire market for electronic components. This isn't merely extreme specialization, it is absolute logistical density. Within a 3-mile radius of a single Tier 1 assembly plant, you will find the Tier 2 component fabricators, the Tier 3 raw material refiners, the custom tooling shops, and the specialized logistics hubs. If an engineer in California needs a circuit board redesigned, shipping the iterations across ocean freight takes weeks. In Shenzhen, that same iteration cycle happens overnight. A runner carries the modified schematic across the street. The micro-suppliers adjust their tooling by sunrise, and pre-production prototypes roll off the line before noon. This density creates an unmatchable velocity of prototyping and assembly, a feedback loop of speed and scale that fundamentally breaks traditional free market calculations. When a Western executive plans to relocate production to bypass geopolitical tension, they are committing a catastrophic analytical error. Moving the primary assembly plant means leaving behind the host organism, severing ties with the thousands of specialized micro-suppliers clustered outside the factory gates. Suppliers that literally do not exist anywhere else on Earth. To pull out of China is not just to shift a factory, it is to cut off the central nervous system of modern hardware, leaving foreign manufacturing stranded in an uncompetitive vacuum. Because consumer assembly is merely the visible layer of a far deeper structural trap. Beneath every smartphone, defense network, and electric vehicle lies an unglamorous, highly polluting sublayer that Western economies intentionally abandoned decades ago. Chemical refining, mineral separation, and precursor synthesis. While Western nations enforced strict environmental frameworks, Beijing executed a calculated long-term maneuver, absorbed the dirty capital-intensive refining processes rejected by Western regulations, exchanging localized ecological damage for absolute structural leverage over global industry. Nowhere is this trade-off more decisive than in critical materials. While China controls 69% of global mining output, compared to 31% for the rest of the world combined, its true monopoly exists further downstream, where China commands 90% of global chemical refining and separation capacity, leaving all other nations with a meager 10% share. By controlling this capital-heavy bottleneck, Beijing triggered an inescapable cause and effect chain. Even when foreign powers manage to extract raw ores on their own soil, they are forced to ship those materials directly to Chinese facilities for refining, placing the entire high-tech revolution at the mercy of Chinese processing hubs. This vulnerability extends directly into global health security. Over 80% of global antibiotic active pharmaceutical ingredients originate inside Chinese facilities, a systemic chokehold where the United States maintains a 100% foreign dependence on China for penicillin G precursors, and India's massive drug manufacturing sector relies on China for 70% of its active precursor chemicals. Without these microscopic chemical building blocks, Western high-tech factories freeze, pharmaceutical pipelines dry up, and sovereign industrial capacity collapses, proving that the ultimate monopoly isn't assembling the finished good, but controlling the refined baseline without which nothing else can exist. Terrified by this strategic vulnerability, Western boardrooms devised what appeared to be a masterstroke. China Plus One. The mandate was simple: diversify supply chains, shift assembly lines to neutral nations, and dismantle Beijing's geopolitical leverage once and for all. Billions in capital flooded into expanding industrial hubs across Vietnam, India, and Mexico, declaring the official dawn of global decoupling. It was a triumphant corporate narrative and a total statistical illusion. Examine the raw trade data, and the underlying mechanical reality becomes glaringly cold. Between 2018 and 2023, U.S. imports from Mexico and Vietnam climbed from $392.6 billion to $589.7 billion, a figure widely celebrated in Western capitals. Yet across that exact same 5-year period, Chinese exports into Mexico and Vietnam surged from $128.3 billion to $220.1 billion. The dominoes didn't fall away from Beijing, they looped directly back to it. These secondary nations haven't supplanted Chinese industrial capacity, they have merely become packaging nodes. Chinese megafactories still fabricate the high-value circuit boards, refined chemical baseline materials, and essential subassemblies. Third-party plants simply uncrate those Chinese inputs, perform minimal final assembly, and affix a brand new country of origin label. The physical movement of global commerce hasn't fundamentally shifted. It has only become longer, more expensive, and remarkably opaque. Freight originating in Shenzhen, China, still moves across the South China Sea, navigating toward Long Beach, USA, or traversing the Panama Canal, with the only structural alteration being a costly intermediate stop to longer the paper trail. By attempting to force a political divorce from the world's manufacturing floor, Western economies engineered a staggering paradox. Decoupling hasn't eroded Beijing's industrial monopoly, it has merely added an extra shipping leg to an inescapable Chinese loop. The West didn't eliminate its ultimate systemic dependency, it just paid a premium to hide it.